What do these two people who seem to have nothing in common, what do they have in common? One is Naftali Herstik. Naftali Herstik was a great cantor. He was the cantor of the Great Synagogue in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim. He was said to have a generational voice that could hit all kinds of notes. He was said that when he davened, you could just see the gates of heaven opening up. He was such a famous cantor in Israel, such a famous cantor in Jerusalem, that every sitting prime minister, from Menachem Begin to Benjamin Netanyahu, would come and hear him daven at the Great Synagogue in Jerusalem. That is Naftali Herstik. The other person is a guy named Bobby Allison, who was a race car driver. And not just a race car driver, Bobby Allison was the most legendary race car driver in American history. Put it this way, Michael Jordan, greatest basketball player ever, won 6 NBA championships. Tom Brady, greatest football player ever, won 7 Super Bowls. Bobby Allison won 85 NASCAR races over 30 years. So one was an all-time great cantor for 30 years. One was an all-time great racer for 30 years. They both happen to have passed away this fall. But they have something very important in common, which is also in common with all of us, and also speaks to that great mystery of mysteries about which Daniel spoke so beautifully, the mystery of the meaning of the binding of Isaac. So this is a story we all know so well. That is, it is famously inscrutable, famously unimaginable, that God would command Abraham to take his son that he loves and bind him on a mountaintop and offer him up as a burnt offering. How could God ever command such a thing? And then, of course, how could Abraham ever be prepared to do such a thing? It's all incomprehensible. The wisest thing that I ever heard about this incomprehensible and terrifying and horrific story was said by Rabbi Simon Greenberg. He was a teacher at the seminary for 50 years, and every year he would tell his rabbinical students, 50 years worth of rabbis ordained at the seminary, do not talk about the binding of Isaac. It is incomprehensible. Just don't even go there. Talk about something else. So, all my life I never understood the binding of Isaac, but then this summer, in my 63rd year, while Shira and I were in Jerusalem for 5 weeks during the midst of the war, I think I finally understand the meaning of the story, the binding of Isaac. And the meaning of it is that parents and children are bound. Parents and children are bound. What our parents do, who our parents are, binds us. It shapes what we do and who we are. And I came to that insight only in Israel, and I'll tell you why. I have shared before the fact that my late parents had a grocery store in Denver, Colorado, and their best customer was a wonderful man named Ben Zussman. Ben Zussman lived in Denver, and he lived and died during the golden age of American Jewry. And he was a very successful businessman. He owned a burlap bag factory, and he had a very lovely and well-resourced life. They had a very beautiful home opposite a beautiful lake, and he was very, very generous. He would order groceries from my father that he did not need in order to give my father the business. And Ben Zussman, who lived in a time of peace and prosperity, died at a ripe old age, in bed, at home, surrounded by his wife and many children and many grandchildren. Ben Zussman, a long, rich, beautiful life. Now, Ben Zussman had a number of children. One of his children, his son named Aver, made Aliyah. Aver and his wife Edna made Aliyah, and they live in Jerusalem, and they brought children into the world. And one of those children got married and had a son, that is Aver's grandson, and this child was named for his great-grandfather, Ben Zussman, but because he was growing up in Israel, he was named Ben Zussman. So Ben Zussman was the American great-grandfather. Ben Zussman was the Israeli great-grandson. And very famously, Ben Zussman finished his IDF service right before October 7th. And very famously, after October 7th, he volunteered to serve again, and he fell in combat. And as I was thinking about this, I realized this is the meaning of the akeidat. How what parents say and what parents do binds their children. Ben Zussman, who lived and died in Denver at a ripe old age, and then Aver Zussman makes Aliyah, and as a result, Ben Zussman, his great-grandson, fights in the IDF, meaning that parents make decisions all the time that we couldn't possibly anticipate how decisive that decision will be on the lives of our children and grandchildren. We couldn't anticipate it, and it's totally profound, and it happens all the time. And it happens not only to Israelis who have children who serve in the IDF, it happens to us all. So, Bobby Allison is this great race car driver, and he's a living legend. And he has two sons named Clifford and Davy. And they grow up and see their father, who's a great race car driver. And they decide, we want to be race car drivers. And they embark on this path with tragic consequences. Davy ends up dying in a head-on collision on a raceway in Michigan, and Clifford is piloting a helicopter to the Talladega Speedway in Talladega, Alabama, and he crashes his helicopter and dies. So this great father, Bobby Allison, has two sons, Davy and Clifford. They want to be like their father with tragic consequences. But it's not always tragic. It's often very beautiful when parents set an example and their kids want to follow it. So that leads us to Naftali Herstik. So Naftali Herstik grows up in a family where there's 12 generations of cantors. Naftali's father, Moshe, was a great cantor. And when Naftali was a teenager, he and his father, Moshe, would be on the bima on Shabbos morning and holidays doing duets together. Have you ever heard of such a thing? I mean, could you even imagine such a thing? Who would do such a thing? So Naftali, the teenage son, and Moshe, the father, do these duets. And when Naftali grows up, he becomes a cantor. And Naftali Herstik has two sons, Netanel and Shraga. You are just never going to guess what they do for a living. I'm going to give you a multiple choice quiz. A, they go into the construction industry. They build hotels. B, they're hedge fund managers. Or C, they become cantors. The answer is C. So Shraga and Netanel Herstik, the son of their father, Naftali, the grandsons of Moshe, they become great cantors. And in this case, it's worked out beautifully for them. Netanel is a cantor at a synagogue in the Hamptons, very lovely, swanky, beautiful, happy place. And Shraga is a cantor and a teacher of Chazanut in Israel. Very happy, very full of meaning. So, this is the profound meaning of the story of the binding of Isaac. Parents and children are bound. And what parents say, what parents do, the example that they create, just has this binding and very important impact on the lives of their children. So if you ask the question, Who would do what Abraham did literally? The answer, of course, is nobody. Nobody would do that. But that misses the point of the story. If you ask the more important question, who would do what Abraham did metaphorically? What parent or grandparent would live a life that casts a giant shadow on their children and grandchildren? What parent or grandparent would set an example which shapes the trajectory of their children and grandchildren's story? The answer is everyone. Everyone. That's why this story is so important, and that's why this story is so terrifying. Because we don't even know how our example is shaping the lives of the people that we love most. And this doesn't only happen with race car drivers and with great cantors. It happens in so many ways. So the parent loves skiing and snowboarding. The child grows up loving skiing and snowboarding. And the parent just loves math. So the child grows up loving math. And the parent is bilingual. They speak Russian, or they speak Italian, or they speak Chinese, or they speak Hebrew. They speak Spanish, they speak Italian. And then their child grows up bilingual. The parent is handy. The parent has in their basement like a room full of tools that they can fix stuff with. Hey, honey, it's a slow Sunday. You want to build an attic? Well, the child will grow up handy. And if the parent doesn't even own a single tool, if the parent has to call a handyman to change the light bulb, hey, Tom, our light bulb went out. Can you come by and change it? Odds are the child is going to call a handyman to change a light bulb. So what parents say and do just shapes the lives of their children. But of course, we know that that's often true, but here's the rub, there's the rub, it's not always true. Because it is also true that our children are their own people. And it is also true that our children find their own way. And it is also true that our children individuate. And it is also true that sometimes our children make very different choices from their parents. And our grandchildren make very different choices from their grandparents. And isn't that the story now? How many of us are parents or grandparents who love Israel, and we look at our children and grandchildren, and they don't get Israel, and they don't love Israel, and some of them won't even go to Israel? How many of us have the dynamic where the parents vote one way, they always vote Democratic, and the kids vote Republican, or vice versa? How many of us have families where we're liberal, cultural Jews, and our adult child goes to Chabad and gets turned on by Chabad and becomes Orthodox and now won't eat in their parents' kitchen? Mom and Dad, I'd like to do Thanksgiving with you, but can we bring plastic? Plastic in the kitchen where you had 1,000 meals. Plastic. And that leads to one important dimension of the story, which is the Torah says, Elohim nisa et Avraham. God tests Abraham. What is our test? Here's our test. Our test is that we live our truth, and we love our truth, and we believe in our truth, and we do our best to teach our truth, and then our adult children say, thanks, Mom and Dad, but that truth, that's not me. That's just not me. It's not who I am. And that's a test. And we know that not all cantors have kids who are cantors, and not all race car drivers have kids who are race car drivers. And we know that there are people who grow up in America and they decide they're going to make Aliyah, and there are people who live in Israel and they decide they're going to come here. And we know we have parents who are not religious who have super religious kids, and we have parents who are super religious who their kids opt out of religion. And here's the main thing. We just know that sometimes our adult children look at their parents and say, that's just the way I want to be. And sometimes our adult children look at the parents and say, that's not what I want to be. I want to be other than. I want to be different from. That's the test. So here's the test. How can we, Hashem Nisad Avraham, God tests Abraham, God tests us. How do we live our truth and let our children live theirs? How do we lean into conviction? We're just deeply convicted about our own life choices and be comfortable, deeply comfortable, that our kids make different choices. What does passing that test look like? So there's no one answer, there's no one-size-fits-all answer, but I will give you my own answer for what it is worth. The way I try to balance that dilemma of holding our kids with open arms is my goal for adult children is that they should be happy, healthy, and talking to us. And if they are all three, happy, healthy, and talking to us, that is a win-win-win. The first win is we're living the life that we want to live. And the second win is they're living the life they want to live. And the third win is the generations are connected and have a loving and warm relationship. We are bound together. That's the message of the akeidat. Parents and children are forever bound, so let's be bound in love and in joy. Shabbat shalom. We